As you all know, in my last video talking about Stormblood, I pointed out some of my issues with the narrative. But with that being said, there are far more things to enjoy instead of disliking. Starting from the end of 4.0, the narrative becomes far more focused than it originally was and quickly tackles some of my criticisms, taking its time between the three stories it's trying to tell between Alamigo, Doma, and the Scions themselves. Starting with Fordola, seeing her backstory made me really understand her interesting disposition, with her disdain for her fellow countrymen, but also being fiercely loyal to her country itself. Over a few missions, Fordola became a character that I loved seeing on screen, and I can't wait to see where she pops up next. This character development is one of the biggest things missing from the original 4.0 story, and is given out generously to many people like Nanamo and Raubahn. At the beginning of A Realm Reborn, these two were inseparable. If you saw one, the other wasn't too far behind, but due to them always being together, it stagnated their growth. Even through their tribulation starting at patch 2.5, by the time we get to Stormblood, they're back to normal. But after Alamigo is freed from Garlemald control, Nanamo notices that Raubahn obviously wants to help rebuild his homeland. So to free him of any lingering feelings of responsibility, she sets out to be more independent by negotiating with the Syndicate herself, showing Raubahn that she's a sultana who can stand on her own 2 feet, allowing him to become the commander of the Alamigan allied forces with his heart unburdened, which allows them to keep their great relationship but gives them room to grow in new directions. And talking about a new direction, 4.2 gives us a new type of villain for Final Fantasy XIV. From his first few moments on screen, you never really trust Asahi. Whether this is due to him working for Garlemald or knowing Tsuyu's past, you're always waiting for the mask to drop. And throughout his first visit to Doma, he doesn't let it drop until the very end, becoming a man who just wants to see Doma burn to the ground, all because he's a simp for Xenos. The reason why I like him so much is because he's the first real iteration of a mustache twirling villain within Final Fantasy XIV. He doesn't have any grand motivations behind his actions other than you hurt the person that I admired, so you have to feel pain in return, which makes him a bit different from every villain that we've had before, which I believe was a genius move because it took your mind away from the crimes of Yotsuyu and made you hope that she could live her life in peace. But unfortunately she doesn't, so the game gives us a bit of a mood raiser. Visiting the Steppe for the second time was great, with us getting a pretty cool 1v1 boss fight against Sadu, the writers leaning into the comedic aspect of Magni referring to himself in the third person, and Stola telling him that he's too immature to ask her out is a fun detour, before things get serious again, like everything dealing with the Garlean Empire, with the writers starting to paint the picture that not all Garleans are bad people, with us speaking to Asahi's allies and them helping us and wanting to try and broker some type of peace between the nations, and even allowing Alphino to travel with them, with the Black Wolf reappearing being one of the final bosses in A Realm Reborn, with him having a radical character shift of him wanting to hunt down Ascians, and from all of the masks that we see on the side of his jacket, it's very obvious that he's been doing pretty well at that. Which leads us into the next character I wish to discuss, which is Solus. Finding out that the founder of the Garlean Empire is still alive is crazy, but on top of that, the fact that he's an Ascian and that he created the Empire for the sole purpose of sowing chaos within the world is insane. From his introduction down to his music, it lets us know that he's here to disrupt the formula of Final Fantasy XIV, and he's the person I'm most excited to see in Shadowbringers, along with his grandson. Varis talking to the Alliance is my favorite scene in the entire expansion, with him flipping and calling out the hypocrisy of every Alliance leader throwing an argument in his face, especially with Merwip being criticized for Limsa Lumensa's treatment of the Beastmen tribes, which has been talked about since A Realm Realm Reborn, beating them handily in a 1v7, to the point where Asahi, the person who is the least experienced in politics, stops the negotiations from breaking down, showing that the Garleans are not only able to combat the world on the battlefield, but in the back channels as well. And this serious business happens while the Scions are going through their own turmoil. Just like the lead up to Heavenswards, the Scions have been separated, but in this case it's more extreme, with their souls being removed from their bodies by an unknown force, keeping a sense of tension about who could be taken next, with it taking a visible toll upon Asahi, with her being more vulnerable than she has ever been, leading the Warrior of Light to be alone for the first time since coming to Eorzea. But these amazing moments are linked by great story dungeons and trials, which I believe are a step up in comparison to Heavenswards, with environments like Alamigo, the Burn, and Garlemald Dark creating unique atmospheres you can't get anywhere else in the game. In addition to fights like Lakshmi, Shinryu, and Tsukiyomi, bringing new mechanics with levels of difficulty not previously seen within the main story genuinely makes me happy, because it does keep the player on its toes, and I feel like it's a bit of a test from the developers to not be so limited by the MSQ and making things so easy, because at this point in time, if you're in Stormblood, you've probably played this game for well over 100 hours. So while these boss fights and these dungeons may be a little bit more difficult than what is normal within the game, you should be able to handle it just because of how long you have been playing, which I feel like is a very praiseworthy thing. But in the end, this leaves Stormblood as a mixed bag, with many high points that are sometimes overshadowed by long overarching nagging issues. But you know what isn't a mixed bag? My videos. And if you want to see more of them, like and subscribe with notifications turned on for my future videos on Final Fantasy XIV and other releases later on this year. But with that being said, it's been Skipx and I'm out.